Problem 1. Darkness. On the 28th of April, 2025, a blackout struck major European countries such as Spain, Portugal, and France. It was not caused by a storm, an attack, or human error. It was simply the collapse of a system we all assumed was unbreakable. For most of the day, we were left disconnected, without electricity, unable to cook, and with nearly none of the services we depend on, including emergency support. The only question on everyone's mind was, how long will this last? What felt like the beginning of a crisis for us would have been just another ordinary day for a medieval peasant. In a time without wires, plugs, or screens, darkness was not an exception. It was the norm. Those people did not fear the night, they knew it well and lived alongside it. Their world was not built to resist collapse, but to exist in a reality where collapse was the natural state of things. While we stare at the switch and wait for the light to return, they had already learned how to make fire, preserve their food, and warm their homes using the resources the land provided. This video is not just a reflection on the past. It is a reminder that, should something similar happen again in the future, we can act as they once did, centuries ago. Problem 1. Darkness. When a blackout hits, the first challenge is darkness. Most people today do not know how to move without electric light. Torches run out, phones lose charge, and fear begins to grow. But for medieval peasants, darkness was part of their natural surroundings. They did not fear it. They knew how to manage it, using simple materials and well-practiced techniques. Some of those skills today could make the difference between chaos and adaptation. The first essential skill was the efficient use of artificial light. Candles, made from animal fat or beeswax, were valuable and used with care. They were only lit when necessary and positioned strategically to illuminate the most with the least. We can replicate this today by storing long-burning candles, preferably made of pure wax, which burn cleaner and slower. One can also learn to make them using tallow or recycled cooking fats. Light placement was a technique learned through experience. A single oil lamp could light an entire space if reflected off a metallic or ceramic surface behind it. Reproducing this at home means placing light sources near light-colored walls or mirrors to maximize illumination. You don't need more power, just smarter positioning. A second key skill was adjusting sight and routine to the natural rhythm of daylight. Peasants rose at dawn and settled at dusk, making full use of daylight. They didn't artificially extend the day. Today, reorganizing essential activities around natural light can be a strategic advantage during power outages. Waking early, cooking at midday, and preparing for nightfall before sunset isn't primitive. It's energy efficient. They also knew how to move safely in the dark. Homes were arranged so everything was within reach from memory: tools, food, clothes, firewood. This translates today to maintaining minimal organization with accessible emergency kits and clear paths inside the home. Learning to navigate in the dark also means knowing your space, practicing moving without switching on lights, and keeping key areas free of obstacles. A forgotten but vital skill was making homemade lamps. They used clay or metal containers with animal or vegetable oil and a floating wick. Anyone can learn to build a simple lamp using a jar, cooking oil, and a piece of cotton. It requires no electricity, no batteries, and can run for hours. They also used torches, bits of wood or cloth soaked in fat, lit for short bursts, enough to complete brief tasks. Even nighttime communication had its codes. A hard knock on the door was no greeting. It signaled urgency. A horn, a bell, or a flashing lantern each had clear meanings. Recreating this today is as simple as agreeing on basic signals with neighbors: a flashlight pattern, a whistle, a mirror for flashing sunlight. It requires no tech, just prior coordination. Darkness stops being the enemy when you know how to work with it. Medieval peasants didn't defeat darkness, they adapted to it. Each skill mentioned has a modern equivalent, usable during any prolonged blackout. It's not about living as if it were the 13th century. It's about recovering a logic we should never have lost. Use less, think more, and always be prepared. Subscribe to the channel if you plan on putting any of these techniques into practice. Problem 2. How to stay warm without electricity. When electricity disappears, the next enemy arrives quickly: cold. In many regions, even a few hours without heating can turn a home into a chilling trap. But centuries before radiators or central heating systems existed, medieval peasants already knew how to face winter. They used techniques that can still teach us today: how to retain warmth effectively, affordably, and without depending on any modern energy source. The first fundamental skill was building thermally efficient spaces. Many medieval houses, especially in cold areas, were partially buried in the ground. Today, we would call this passive architecture. It was not for aesthetics, it was functional. The surrounding earth acted as natural insulation, shielding against wind and stabilizing indoor temperature. While we can't all live underground today, we can apply this principle to small structures like outdoor sheds or cellars, or by conditioning a single, centralized, insulated room at home for emergency use. Walls were thick and often made from materials like clay mixed with straw and dung, known as wattle and daub. These materials retained heat and insulated well against the cold. Windows were small, often sealed during winter, and covered with thick fabrics or animal hides to prevent heat from escaping. In today's world, these practices remind us of the importance of minimizing cold air infiltration. Sealing doors and windows, using thermal curtains, and placing thick rugs or blankets on exposed surfaces. In emergencies, even towels, cushions, or improvised coverings can act as thermal barriers. In medieval life, the fire was the heart of the home, but it was used wisely. It was often kept as embers beneath ash to reuse the next day. Fire served not just for cooking, but also for heating spaces and drying clothes. One particularly clever technique involved using hot stones. Stones were heated by the fire during the day and at night buried in ash or wrapped in thick fabrics to place in beds, on benches, or on floors. These stones released heat for hours, without flame, without smoke, and with complete safety. This method can easily be replicated today. A well-heated stone wrapped in a towel can provide enough warmth to get through the night. It can also be placed under a small table covered with thick blankets, creating a thermal cabin. This principle is still used in countries like Japan in traditional home heating systems, without electricity. Another key strategy was intelligent use of clothing and bedding. No one slept alone. Parents, children, and even small animals shared space and body heat. Clothing was layered, linen near the skin, followed by wool, then animal hides. Hats were essential, even indoors, because a large amount of body heat escapes through the head. For sleeping, mattresses were filled with straw, leaves, or feathers, which served as thermal insulation. Today, sleeping with several layers of clothing, including hats, scarves, and gloves, along with thermal blankets or sleeping bags inside the bed, can greatly increase heat retention. Floors were covered with thick layers of straw or fabric to prevent cold from rising through the ground. This principle can be adapted with rugs, blankets, or even cardboard if nothing else is available. Also, sleeping spaces were shared not for emotional reasons but for thermal ones. The human body is a constant heat source, and sleeping in groups is a highly effective survival tool. Another essential skill was fuel management. Firewood was not burned carelessly. From a young age, people learned to select dry wood, cut it precisely, and light efficient fires that produced more heat with fewer resources. They also knew how to preserve hot embers under ash so they wouldn't need to restart the fire every morning. In a modern context, learning to start a fire without commercial products, using minimal fuel, or even maintaining warmth with safe candles in enclosed spaces can be crucial during extended outages. Heating a space does not always mean raising the temperature of the entire house. Medieval peasants knew this well. They would isolate a single room, reduce the space that needed heating, and focus all their efforts on that one place. In times of crisis, concentrating warmth in one area is far more effective than trying to keep an entire house warm. These skills, far from being outdated, are practical tools in a modern system that can fail. You don't need to live like it's the Middle Ages to use them. You only need to remember that today's comfort is fragile, but yesterday's knowledge was solid. And when the cold seeps in through the cracks, that knowledge may be the only thing keeping the heat alive. Problem 3. Food supply. In a prolonged blackout, the first thing to fail isn't just the lights, it's the supply chain. Without electricity, fridges stop working, supermarkets can't receive deliveries, and water may become unsafe to drink. In this situation, the way medieval peasants managed their food becomes a practical manual for self-sufficiency. Because they didn't eat what was simply available, they ate what they had preserved over months. Every food item, every technique, every habit had one clear purpose: to last. The first major skill was natural cold storage. Peasant homes often had cellars, underground pantries, or storage chambers dug into the ground. These required no power. They used the Earth's stable temperature to keep food fresh for months. Root vegetables like turnips, carrots, radishes, or beetroots were stored buried in dry sand or covered in straw. Apples were wrapped individually in cloth and placed on ventilated shelves. Even cabbage was stored directly in the ground or covered with dry leaves. Today, we can replicate that principle using basements, garages, sheltered balconies, or storage rooms. The essential element is a cool, dark space with minimal humidity. A simple wooden crate filled with straw, placed in the coldest corner of the house, can make a big difference when the fridge stops working. The second skill was drying food. In the medieval world, drying was not a luxury, it was survival. Herbs, fruits, roots, fish, and meat were all dried. Air drying was done by hanging food in the upper parts of the house, where warm air collected and air circulated. Low-heat ovens were also used, or just lines set up on sunny, dry days. This technique removes moisture, the main enemy of food preservation. Today, this can be done with simple tools: hanging nets, wooden trays, and access to sunlight or a moderate heat source like a wood-burning stove. Having dried foods like fruits, vegetables, jerky, or even grated bread can give you weeks or months of food security without electricity. The third essential skill was smoking meat and fish. Small structures called smokehouses were built, where embers produced low, consistent heat. The smoke acted as a natural preservative, stopping bacteria from growing. Hams, bacon, trout, or eels were hung inside for days or weeks depending on the climate. This didn't just preserve food, it made it more flavorful. Today, not everyone can build a smokehouse, but it's possible to improvise. A metal barrel, a carefully managed grill, or even a portable smoking box can help replicate the principle. Learning to preserve protein without refrigeration is not optional during an emergency. It's essential. The fourth skill was fermentation. Far from being a modern trend, fermentation was a vital necessity. Bread, beer, vinegar, pickles, and even dairy products were fermented to preserve them and improve nutrition. Sauerkraut, for instance, not only lasted for months, it also provided vitamin C in winter, preventing scurvy. Fermenting at home today is simple. All you need is salt, water, a glass or ceramic container, and time. Cabbage, carrots, garlic, or cucumbers can all be turned into nutritious reserves without using energy. Unlike canning, fermentation requires no heat or pressure, just care and knowledge. The fifth major skill was sealing food with fat. Many stews and pâtés were covered with a layer of melted animal fat which, once solidified, created an airtight seal. This allowed cooked food to last for weeks or months in ceramic jars. They also made clarified fat, similar to ghee, which could be stored without refrigeration and used for cooking or as a dense energy source in winter. This method can be adapted today with pork fat, beef fat, or even homemade clarified butter. Stored in clean, sealed jars, away from sunlight, it's a safe reserve for times of scarcity. In many medieval households, the most valuable foods were hidden. Not out of paranoia, but out of caution. Small secret compartments were dug into the ground, behind walls or under loose floorboards. Grains, fat jars, cured cheese, or spirits were kept there. During war or famine, anything not hidden was vulnerable. It wasn't just about having food, it was about protecting it, rotating it, and sharing it with those who deserved it. Food wasn't just energy, it was community survival. Each family contributed something. Some raised animals, others baked bread, others stored salt. No one had everything, but together, there was enough. In a real prolonged blackout, the first thing to vanish is not comfort, it's fresh food. When that happens, forgotten medieval preservation skills will be the line between adapting and depending. You don't need a farm. You just need knowledge, practice, and foresight. Because in the end, these weren't medieval skills, they were human skills. Problem 4. Communication. When the power goes out, we don't just lose light. We also lose the ability to communicate, to navigate, and to understand what's happening beyond our front door. In a hyper-connected world, the absence of signal can be just as unsettling as darkness itself. But medieval peasants lived without screens, mobile networks, or torches, and yet they managed to maintain a functional system of lighting and communication. They did it through ingenuity, habit, and community agreements. Many of these strategies are still perfectly valid today. The first fundamental skill was creating and using controlled light. Candles weren't bought in packs of 10. They were made at home, using animal fat or beeswax. They were poured into clay or metal molds or rolled around linen wicks. The light they gave was soft, but enough to move about, cook, or do basic crafts. Today, we can relearn this skill with homemade methods: heating fat, filtering wax, and improvising wicks with strips of cotton. Knowing how to produce light without electricity is one of the most direct paths to autonomy. In addition to candles, they used oil lamps, ceramic or metal containers filled with a small amount of fat and a floating wick. These were more stable and long-lasting than candles and allowed for extended use with minimal fuel. Today, any small jar, some vegetable oil, and a homemade wick are enough to recreate them. But it wasn't just about having a light source. It was about using it effectively. Lighting was positioned strategically, close to the ground if it was windy, in front of white surfaces to reflect light, or in the center of the table to share it among several people. A single well-placed flame could serve multiple people. At home, placing a candle in front of a mirror or inside a glass lantern can triple its effectiveness without burning extra fuel. Light also meant mobility. When going outside was necessary, they used improvised torches, rags soaked in fat, resin-rich branches, or dry stalks. Today, learning to make a safe torch, even just as a last resort, can be a useful skill. It doesn't require sophistication, only familiarity with available materials. But as important as seeing was being able to communicate over distances without technology. Medieval communities developed clear signals that required no words. A horn blown 3 times could mean fire or an attack. A hard knock at the door at night wasn't a polite gesture. It was an urgent message. A red cloth hung from a window could signal illness. These codes weren't made up on the spot. They were agreed upon in advance and respected. Today, we can apply the same logic with torches, whistles, mirrors, or sound signals. A flashlight blinking twice might mean, "I'm safe." A long whistle could mean, "Come now." A mirror can reflect sunlight to send flashes over long distances. The key is ensuring that all members of the group, or neighbors, know and practice these codes before they're ever needed. There was also the power of local communication. Medieval villages didn't need satellites or radios. They knew what was happening because they walked, listened, and shared. Information flowed from house to house by word of mouth. Today, in a situation with no signal, word of mouth returns as the most reliable method. Having nearby allies, knowing your neighbors, and setting a basic routine for contact can be the difference between isolation and safety. In the Middle Ages, light wasn't abundant, but it was used with intention. Communication wasn't instant, but it was dependable. In a modern blackout, adopting this mindset isn't stepping backwards. It's moving forward with purpose. Because neither darkness nor silence are threats in themselves. The real danger is not knowing what to do when they arrive. When everything fails, light, water, signal, supply chains, what remains is not modern comfort, but the skills that once shaped everyday life. Medieval peasants weren't heroes, but they knew how to survive without external systems. They knew how to keep warm, how to light the darkness, how to store food for months, and above all, how to cooperate. Today, their methods are not relics. They are reminders that self-sufficiency doesn't begin with technology, but with preparation, practice, and community. We may not live in their world, but if ours shuts down, their lessons might be the only thing that keeps us safe. If you found this content helpful, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. What you learned today might save you tomorrow.